evening, friends. I'm Thomas Walker, and tonight I bring you a tale that you may find as unbelievable as it is chilling. It's a story of greed, desperation, and the strange twists of fate that can bind people together in the most sinister ways. This is the story of the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra, Jr., the son of one of the most famous men in the world. The year is 1963, and the world is still reeling from the recent assassination of President John F. Kennedy. A few days after that tragedy, on December 8, 1963, a quiet evening at Harrah's Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe would soon be overshadowed by a crime that would make headlines across the world. Frank Sinatra, Jr., at just 19 years old, was beginning to step out from his father's enormous shadow, trying to carve his own path in the world of music. The young Sinatra was performing in Lake Tahoe that evening as part of a gig in the bustling resort town that straddles the California-Nevada border. He was in his dressing room, resting, when the door knocked. His night, so full of promise, would soon take a dark turn. The men at the door were not there to congratulate him. They were there to abduct him. Two former high school classmates from Los Angeles, Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler, had been carefully following Frank Jr. from city to city. They knew exactly when and where to strike. They had been planning for weeks. The plan was simple but audacious. Kidnap Frank Sinatra, Jr., demand a ransom from the elder Sinatra, and disappear into the shadows with a fortune. Keenan and Amsler entered Sinatra's dressing room, pretended to be delivering a package, and then, without warning, they bound Sinatra's friend with tape, blindfolded Frank Jr., and swiftly took him away, ushering him out through a side door to their waiting car. It wasn't long before Sinatra's friend, left behind and bound, managed to free himself. Panicked, he quickly alerted the authorities. Law enforcement set up roadblocks, and soon the search was on. The criminals were stopped at one point by police, but Keenan and Amsler managed to bluff their way through, continuing their flight south toward Los Angeles. By 9:40 p.m., the FBI office in Reno was called in, and from there an operation of immense scale began to unfold, one that would pull the nation into its grip, as Frank Sinatra, Sr., would face a dilemma no parent should ever have to endure: how to save his son. The FBI moved swiftly. They advised Sinatra to wait for the ransom demand, to pay it, and then, through a carefully coordinated operation, track the money to find the kidnappers. On December 10th, the call came. The kidnappers demanded $240,000 in ransom, a small fortune, in 1963. Sinatra, Sr., ever the composed figure in public, now faced a far more personal battle. He agreed, preparing the money as instructed by the FBI. The ransom would be dropped off between two school buses in Sepulveda, California, in the early hours of December 11th. Yet, as the hours passed, something unexpected happened. The kidnappers, having secured the ransom, were about to make their escape, when one of them, the third conspirator, John Irwin, grew nervous. He couldn't handle the pressure. And so, in a twist of fate, Irwin decided to release Frank Sinatra, Jr. on his own. Frank Jr. walked a few miles, disoriented and confused, but soon found a security guard in Bel Air. To avoid press coverage, he was hidden in the trunk of the guard's patrol car and driven away to his mother's home. Sinatra, Jr. was free, but the questions remained. How had this bold plan gone so awry for the kidnappers? Why had Irwin released the young man, and what did that mean for the rest of the plot? While Sinatra Jr. was being taken to safety, the FBI was already piecing together the investigation. They traced the kidnappers' movements to the house in Canoga Park, where Sinatra had been held, and soon they were able to identify the culprits. Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin were quickly brought in for questioning. But even as the FBI closed in, strange rumors began to spread. Whispers that Frank Sinatra Jr. had been in on the plot all along, that the kidnapping was just an elaborate publicity stunt. When Frank Sinatra Jr. was freed, the sense of relief was palpable. The ransom had been paid. The young Sinatra was safe. But the kidnappers, the men who had orchestrated this crime, were not yet in the clear. Their escape had been foiled by a sudden and inexplicable act. One of their own had released Sinatra Jr. and sent him walking to safety. Why? What had caused John Irwin to break ranks, to abandon the plot at the very moment of their success? It was a question that would echo through the halls of the FBI as they moved quickly to piece together the fragments of this strange crime. As Sinatra Jr. was whisked away to safety, the Bureau began to track the kidnappers' every move, retracing the steps of Barry Keenan, Joe Amsler, and John Irwin. They didn't have much to go on, but what they did have were the connections, the threads that would soon reveal the unraveling of this audacious plan. In the days following the release, the investigation was intensifying. Barry Keenan, the mastermind behind the plot, was a man with a history. A former high school classmate of Sinatra's sister, Nancy, Keenan had fallen on hard times. He had been struggling with a variety of personal and financial issues, and saw the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. as a way to escape those difficulties. But it wasn't just money he was after. It was the idea of wealth, the possibility of a lavish life that he and his partners could attain by kidnapping a man so famous. But even Keenan, with all his planning, couldn't anticipate the flaws in his scheme, nor the mistakes his partners would make. Joe Amsler, for instance, was no seasoned criminal. He had been swept up in Keenan's dream of riches and had not fully grasped the gravity of their actions. Irwin, too, had his own anxieties, and it was these cracks in their resolve that allowed the FBI to find the first chink in the armor. As the investigation continued, the FBI tracked down every lead. They soon identified the house in Canoga Park, where Sinatra Jr. had been held. The small suburban home that had served as his prison for 2 days. The house, a modest structure, seemed ordinary on the surface, but it would become a key piece in the investigation. Evidence was found there. Items belonging to the kidnappers, personal effects that tied them to the crime. It was in this house that Sinatra Jr. had been held, bound, and blindfolded. Yet, as Sinatra Jr. recalled, he had seen little of his captors. He had only heard the voices of the men who had taken him. It was a strange twist. How could the FBI track down the perpetrators so quickly when Sinatra Jr. himself had seen so little? Was there more to the story than met the eye? Was there a deeper layer to the plan? Something that Sinatra Jr. himself had been unaware of? The FBI's work was far from over, but the first major breakthrough came when John Irwin, overwhelmed by guilt, made a decision that would seal the fate of his co-conspirators. Irwin, the third conspirator, could no longer bear the weight of what he had done. In a turn that none could have predicted, he walked into the San Diego FBI office and confessed to his role in the kidnapping. He was the first to crack. and his confession, though incomplete, led to the capture of Keenan and Amsler. But even as the three men were apprehended and the ransom money, mostly recovered, was returned, the mystery of Irwin's change of heart remained. Why had he freed Frank Sinatra, Jr.? Was it a moment of remorse, or was there something else at play? As the investigation deepened, the theory that Sinatra, Jr. had orchestrated the kidnapping as a publicity stunt began to surface, a defense that would later be pursued in court, despite the lack of evidence to support it. Some speculated that the kidnapping had been a scheme for attention, a way for Sinatra, Jr. to step out of his father's shadow, to claim his place in the spotlight. But the FBI had no such evidence. The facts were clear. Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin were the ones responsible, and their motives were as simple as they were desperate. Money, and the chance to escape their own troubled lives. But even as the kidnappers were caught and the trial began, the mystery remained. Was Irwin's decision to free Sinatra, Jr. an act of conscience, or was it a strategic move to distance himself from the crime? Why had Keenan, the mastermind, failed to consider the consequences of his plan in such detail? Was this all just the result of amateur criminals, or was there a darker, more insidious element at play? As the trial unfolded in 1964, the evidence against Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin grew. Their confessions, their involvement in the crime, their capture, each of these pieces brought the story closer to a conclusion. But the whispers of a deeper conspiracy, of things left unsaid, still remained in the corners of the case. In the weeks that followed, the trial of Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin unfolded. Their fate was sealed by their own confessions, by the evidence gathered from their hideout in Canoga Park, and by the testimony of those who had witnessed their actions. In the end, Keenan, the mastermind, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. But as the years passed, the mystery of his motivations remained. You see, Barry Keenan was a man with a history of struggles, financial troubles, personal failures, and a deep-seated frustration with his own life had led him to this desperate act. But as Keenan later admitted, he had never planned for the crime to end the way it did. The ransom, the money, it was supposed to be a means to escape, to build a better life. But when Irwin grew nervous and freed Sinatra, Jr., the whole plan began to unravel. Was it just an impulsive decision on Irwin's part? Or was there something deeper at play? A moment of conscience, perhaps, or something more? Keenan, Amsler, and Irwin were all convicted, but their sentences were not as harsh as one might have expected for such a high-profile kidnapping. Keenan, in particular, would serve only a fraction of his sentence, his time in prison cut short by a declaration of legal insanity. For years, he would remain a figure surrounded by questions, a man who had masterminded a crime that had captured the public's imagination, but whose actions seemed to have no clear explanation. And what of Frank Sinatra, Jr., the young man whose life had been thrust into the spotlight by a crime he hadn't chosen, would continue on with his career, though the shadow of the kidnapping never truly left him. He would later recall that period with a mix of confusion and frustration, never quite understanding why he had been chosen, or what the criminals had hoped to achieve. Despite his father's wealth, despite his family's fame, he had been caught in a web of madness, a victim of men whose desperation outweighed their sense of reason. But the most unsettling part of this story, my friends, is not the crime itself, nor the resolution of the investigation. It's the remaining question that remains. Even now, how much of the story do we truly know? What were the real motivations behind the kidnapping? Was it simply money? Or was there something darker, something hidden beneath the surface? And what of the role played by those who never truly spoke up? The ones who remained in the shadows, watching the drama unfold from a distance. In the end, the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. was a crime that brought a sense of closure to the public, a sense of justice as the kidnappers were arrested and convicted. But it also left a trail of unanswered questions. Was it really just a plot for money? Or was there something else, something more complicated, something more sinister, that motivated the men who set it all in motion? The legacy of the kidnapping remain cues, not just in the headlines of 1963, but in the quiet, unsettling echoes it leaves behind, the strange, unexplained decisions of those involved. The nervous breakdown of Irwin, the confession letter written by Keenan, the oddities of the ransom drop, and the unusual behavior of those who had the most to lose. Each of these pieces of the puzzle remain incomplete. We may never truly know the full story. And so, my friends, as we close this chapter, we are left with the image of Frank Sinatra Jr. walking through the streets of Bel Air, freed, but still bound by the strange events of those 2 days, the ransom money, recovered but never fully accounted for, the kidnappers, convicted but never fully understood, and the haunting question that still echoes in the air: what was really behind the plot to kidnap Frank Sinatra Jr.? Was it a crime of opportunity, or was there something more hidden in the shadows? Stay with us, and as the years pass, remember that sometimes the truth is more elusive than we think. Some stories remain untold. Some mysteries remain unsolved.